Hi guys, find out how this man was kidnapped along with his family, and his captors are practicing witchcraft with kidnapped people. In the end he manages to escape and take revenge on his captors. Welcome to Worth Recap. This time I show you the summary of the movie Spell. It all begins with Marquis, a successful lawyer who remembers a bit of his childhood while getting ready to go to work. There he receives a call from an unknown person from Kentucky to inform him that his father recently passed away. Later Marquis informs his family of what happened. And the wife asks him about his father. He tells them that he hasn't seen him since he fled Appalachia because of his father's abuse. His children do not want to go to rural areas, however his wife tells them that the whole family will go to offer their condolences. For the trip, Marquis rents a plane since he must reach a mountainous area, but before arriving he stops in a desert area to refuel. Marquis enters the store and sees how various things used in witchcraft are sold. On the other hand, Tidon meets a brother and they start talking. Tidon shows him the hand that was broken playing basketball, then tells him that he is going to the mountains, and when he finds out about this he leaves scared. In the Marquis store talk to the old man who attends and sees that he is sewing a mojo bag object that serves for protection against spells. When Marquis is about to leave, the old man asks him where he is going, and when he finds out that it is to the mountains, he offers him objects for protection, but Marquis only tells him that he does not believe in those things and leaves the place. Then they all go up to the plane and resume their journey. While flying to the Appalachians they are hit by a storm and Marquis loses control of the plane, and wakes up wounded in the foot in an unknown place. Despite the pain he approaches the window to see the place where he is. Suddenly Mrs. Eloise enters the room and asks Marquis to go to bed, but he says he doesn't need it until he finds his family. Because of this Eloise calls her husband Earl to help her put Marquis in bed. However, seeing his size, he states that they need the help of his son Louis, who puts Marquis in bed. Immediately to calm him down Eloise blows Marquis a powder that leaves him paralyzed. Then Eloise comes out of the house and picks up some dirt and then picks up Marquis' clothes, then mixes the dirt with Marquis' blood. With the mixture she makes the shape of a doll and puts it in the oven, while she waits with pieces of Marquis clothing. A smaller one, with everything ready Eloise makes a voodoo doll. Then he goes with Marquis and introduces him to the Bujetai doll, which in his words is one thing that represents another, and this one represents him, and the more it looks like him, the more it will be him. In this way what happens to the doll is going to move on to him. Then she explains how the powders I used to paralyze and revive him work. Finally she leaves the doll in the window observing it with salt so that according to her the devil does not enter. Then she leaves. At night Marquis, despite the pain, tries to escape and goes out the window. While jumping between roofs he reaches a hole above a barn, where he discovers an entire sect where all its members have voodoo dolls, and observes how Eloise manages to cure a woman. Change. After Earl kills a cat, cuts out its tongue and places it in the girl's Bujetai, allowing it to speak, then heals a blind man by placing the cat's eyes in his Bujetai and him the eyes of a goat, recovering his sight. At that moment Eloise asks him what he sees, and he points to the place from which Marquis was observing. He immediately hides and runs back to his room. Eloise also goes to Marquis' room to make sure that this Marquis in the room. Marquis barely manages to enter the room and lie down on the bed. When Eloise enters the room she finds the window open and Marquis soaking wet, so she asks him why he opened the window and he is wet. He tells her that he needed air and he finds himself drenched from having a nightmare with her family. Eloise believes the story and leaves the room. In the morning Marquis finds a plate of food next to him, and since he is hungry he begins to eat. After finishing Eloise enters the room and seeing the empty plate takes it away to serve him another. At that moment Marquis takes advantage to disarm a bell that was on the door of his room. Eloise returns and brings with her some bones that she gives to Marquis so that he can try to guess his future. He assembles the bones and realizes that they have the shape of his son's hand, and when he realizes that he ate his son, he vomits breakfast. After this, Marquis gets up and tries to run away without making a sound, hiding from both Earl and Eloise, thus managing to escape. However, Eloise realizes that Marquis escaped and sends Louis to look for him. While Marquis flees, he manages to find his plane destroyed and with blood stains inside, then decides to continue and finds another house and tries to go to it. But before he can get there, Louis catches him, and Marquis wakes up again in Eloise's house and watches them leave so he can prepare for the blood moon. The pain in Marquis' foot worsens and he decides to remove the bandage to check his wound and realizes that he has a buried nail and begins to remove it to be able to walk better. Then he searches the house for his family, finding graves outside the house. Marquis runs to her and begins to dig up, finding the carcasses of various animals. He immediately goes to the barn and finds a hatch through which he enters, and finds human remains and a grimoire that mentions the blood moon as a life transfer spell that requires a sacrifice and that it has met certain requirements. Then in a shelf finds the powders that Eloise uses to paralyze him. He leaves the barn and goes to the house where he makes a voodoo doll, which he hides under the stairs of the house. Shortly after, he hears a phone and finds it in a box. At that moment the family returns home, so he takes the cell phone to his room, and to avoid raising suspicions he drives the nail back into his foot. Eloise enters the room and checks Marquis' foot to see if everything is in order. When she sees the nail she leaves, and at that moment Marquis takes the cell phone and calls the police and gives them her location. He removes the nail again, and shortly after the police arrive, and at that moment Eloise enters the room and subdues Marquis with the help of the Bugatti, whose tongue she removes so that Marquis cannot speak, and ties him up to immobilize him. Earl and Eloise talk to the policeman for a while and then he leaves, and while they talk to the officer, Marquis takes the doll of him along with the tongue and flees the place, meeting the police late at night. He gets him on the patrol where he breaks the Bugatti's Curtis and puts his tongue on it. After this he can speak again and tells everything that happened to the officer, who takes him back to Eloise, where several people were waiting for him, revealing that the policeman was always with them. The presents take Marquis out of the patrol car and take him to the barn, where his whole family appears in a kind of trance. Eloise uses the powder on Marquis again and paralyzes him. Then they put him on the table and prepare him to take out his heart. Eloise tries to stab Marquis, but before she can do it he grabs her hand and stabs Earl with the knife. Everyone, those present, leave the place while a flashback of what Marquis did in the barn, where he changed the powders, then wakes up his family and promises to get them out of there. He then intersects the patrol car and stabs the officer, then goes back to the house and takes the Bugatti he had put away and throws it in a bucket of water. They all gather to catch Marquis. Louis enters the barn and subdues Marquis, trying to kill him. But before he can do so, Louis begins to have difficulty breathing and then vomits water. Outside, Eloise finds Louis's Bugatti in the bucket of water and angrily enters the barn, telling him she tells Marquis that she was very smart to use the Bugattis to attack them. However, she is smarter and that's why she hides hers. She tries to attack it, but Marquis uses the powder to paralyze and stops her in her tracks. He then tells her that he created his own Bugatti from her and punches the Bugatti, which sends Eloise flying into a column, which breaks it and drops a lamp that starts a fire in the barn. Marquis leaves the place and places salt on the exit for Eloise to get trapped in, then grabs a box full of Bugattis and tells everyone around him to leave him alone or he'll use his Bugattis. Then we see how the barn explodes with Eloise inside. Marquis meets with his family and they leave in the police car. Back in the barn we can see Eloise's Bugatti open her eyes. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to see more videos like this. If you wanted to see more, I recommend this movie about children with superpowers.